Good morning. My name's Kay Bachman. I am the director of the Project Management Office here at Gonzaga, and I am just so excited that we're finally getting going. It's finally been a year in the making, and I'm just so excited. So I sometimes have a hard time containing myself, don't I? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you are here to hear about leadership in the project lifecycle, you are in the right place. There's noise with that advance. So I told you a little bit about myself, but I'm going to ask the others to go ahead and introduce themselves, a little bit of their background, and we'll start out with Matt.
All right, my name is Matthew Bazar. I'm the Associate Director of Project and Portfolio Management at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. We have an IT staff of about 70. I am the head of the PMO, and I have one full-time project manager. The rest of our projects are managed by our managers and directors in IT. I started my IT professional career in development, in a database programming, moved up through web programming. I managed our 6 application developers for a few years, and then was promoted to start our project management office.
Roger.
My name's Roger Cummings. I'm in the PMO office here at Gonzaga. I started here 11 years ago. I actually started in the School of Engineering working in a computer lab, and I've kind of worked my way through until about 5 months ago. I was a Unix administrator. I did virtualization and a lot of storage management, that kind of stuff, and then moved over into the project management area. So I'm pretty new at this, but yeah.
Doing quite well. And Beth.
I'm Beth Forrest. I'm with the University of San Francisco. I have been at the university off and on since I was a student there. USF actually stands for You Stay Forever. And I did leave, but I came back. I left, I came back. But I've been in IT for the last 14 years. And I started off as help desk manager. I moved into a project management role. I managed the banner implementation. And then I became director of project management. But I am very much the kind of person who likes to keep my hands really dirty, and so I asked to step down, and I moved into a senior system analyst role, which I'm very happy in. But as a senior system analyst, I'm still managing a lot of smaller projects, and we only have, well, some people only have one project manager, so I shouldn't say we only have, but we do have 4 project managers in our office, so we're really lucky. They're really good, and they manage the much larger scale projects. But throughout IT, almost all of our various areas have to do some sort of project management.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to start things off a little bit here with a quick little video to kind of get you to thinking about what we're going to discuss.
How many of you are completely comfortable with calling yourselves a leader? See, I've asked that question all the way across the country, and everywhere I ask it, no matter where, there's always a huge portion of the audience that won't put up their hand. And I've come to realize that we have made leadership into something bigger than us. We made it into something beyond us. We made it about changing the world. And we've taken this title of leader and we treat it as if it's something that one day we're going to deserve. But to give it to ourselves right now means a level of arrogance or cockiness that we're not comfortable with. And I worry sometimes that we spend so much time celebrating amazing things that hardly anybody can do, that we've convinced ourselves that those are the only things we're celebrating. And we start to devalue the things that we can do every day. And we start to take moments where we truly are a leader, and we don't let ourselves take credit for it, and we don't let ourselves feel good about it. And I've been lucky enough over the last 10 years to work with some amazing people who have helped me redefine leadership in a way that I think has made me happier. And with my short time today, I just want to share with you the one story that is probably most responsible for that redefinition. I went to a school on a little school called Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick. And on my last day there, a girl came up to me and she said, "I remember the first time that I met you." And then she told me a story that happened 4 years earlier. She said, on my day before I started university, I was in the hotel room with my mom and my dad, and I was so scared and so convinced that I couldn't do this, that I wasn't ready for university, that I just burst into tears. And my mom and my dad were amazing. They were like, "Look, we know you're scared, but let's just go tomorrow. Let's go to the first day. And if at any point you feel as if you can't do this, that's fine. Just tell us, we will take you home. We love you no matter what." And she says, so I went the next day and I was standing in line getting ready for registration, and I looked around and I just knew I couldn't do it. I knew I wasn't ready. I knew I had to quit. And she says, I made that decision, and as soon as I made it, there was this incredible feeling of peace that came over me. And I turned to my mom and my dad to tell them that we needed to go home. And just at that moment, you came out of the Student Union building wearing the stupidest hat I have ever seen in my life. It was awesome. And you had a big sign promoting Shinorama, which is Students Fighting Cystic Fibrosis, a charity I've worked with for years. And you had a bucket full of lollipops. And you were walking along and you were handing the lollipops out to people in line and talking about Shinorama. And all of a sudden, you got to me and you just stopped and you stared. It was creepy. This girl right here knows exactly what I'm talking about. And then you looked at the guy next to me and you smiled and you reached in your bucket, you pulled out a lollipop and you held it out to him. And you said, you need to give a lollipop to the beautiful woman standing next to you. And she said, I have never seen anyone get more embarrassed faster in my life. He turned beet red and he wouldn't even look at me, he just kind of held the lollipop out like this. And I felt so bad for this dude that I took the lollipop. And as soon as I did, you got this incredibly severe look on your face and you looked at my mom and my dad and you said, look at that, look at that. First day away from home and already she's taking candy from a stranger. And she said everybody lost it. 20 feet in every direction, everyone started to howl. And I know this is cheesy and I don't know why I'm telling you this, but in that moment when everyone was laughing, I knew that I shouldn't quit. I knew that I was where I was supposed to be and I knew that I was home. And I haven't spoken to you once in the 4 years since that day, but I heard that you were leaving. And I had to come up and tell you that you've been an incredibly important person in my life, and I'm gonna miss you. Good luck. And she walks away, and I'm flattened. And she gets about 6 feet away, she turns around and smiles and goes, you should probably know this too. I'm still dating that guy 4 years later. A year and a half after I moved to Toronto, I got an invitation to their wedding. Here's the kicker, I don't remember that. I have no recollection of that moment, and I've searched my memory banks because that is funny, and I should remember doing it, and I don't remember it. And that was such an eye-opening, transformative moment for me to think that maybe the biggest impact I'd ever had on anyone's life, a moment that had a woman walk up to a stranger 4 years later and say, you've been an incredibly important person in my life, was a moment that I didn't even remember. How many of you guys have a lollipop moment, a moment where someone said something or did something that you feel fundamentally made your life better? All right. How many of you have told that person they did it? See, why not? We celebrate birthdays where all you have to do is not die for 365 days. And yet we let people who have made our lives better walk around without knowing it. And every single one of you has been the catalyst for a lollipop moment. You have made someone's life better by something that you said or that you did. And if you think you haven't, think about all the hands that didn't go back up when I asked that question. You're just one of the people who hasn't been told. But it is so scary to think of ourselves as that powerful. It can be frightening to think that we can matter that much to other people. Because as long as we make leadership something bigger than us, as long as we keep leadership something beyond us, as long as we make it about changing the world, we give ourselves an excuse not to expect it every day from ourselves and from each other. Marianne Williamson said, our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light and not our darkness that frightens us. And my call to action today is that we need to get over that. We need to get over our fear of how extraordinarily powerful we can be in each other's lives. We need to get over it so we can move beyond it. And our little brothers and our little sisters, and one day our kids, or our kids right now, can watch us start to value the impact we can have on each other's lives more than money and power and titles and influence. We need to redefine leadership as being about lollipop moments. How many of them we create, how many of them we acknowledge, how many of them we pay forward, and how many of them we say thank you for. Because we've made leadership about changing the world, and there is no world. There's only 6 billion understandings of it. And if you change one person's understanding of it, one person's understanding of what they're capable of, one person's understanding of how much people care about them, one person's understanding of how powerful an agent for change they can be in this world, you change the whole thing. And if we can understand leadership like that, I think if we can redefine leadership like that, I think we can change everything. And it's a simple idea, but I don't think it's a small one. And I want to thank you all so much for letting me share it with you today.
Oh, they clapped.
Yeah.
All right, what we came together for today is to really talk about the phases of the life cycle of a project. And each phase has a unique set of objectives and conditions, yet each phase requires a unique leadership style and characteristic. So we're going to take it phase by phase, and I'd like to open this up to where it's more of a discussion and a dialogue between us, letting the panel kind of pick up on the bullet points for which they came up with. and just have a little bit of dialogue. So initiation, you know, we've got several up there, and I think everybody agrees that that's the beginning, right? That's the concept. That's where we're pulling together all the information and kind of that high level, what's the need? What needs to be different? What are the goals, the objectives? Beth?
I would say probably with initiation, the most important thing is being able to look at the project that you're taking on and really understand the expectations of both your stakeholders and your team members, and setting at that very beginning moment that vision for how the project is going to work and how you're going to build trust with your team and how you're going to communicate with your team. Because if that's not done at the very beginning of the project, you're going to have a lot of problems coming up throughout the project. And so you've got to make sure that partnership is firmly established at the beginning. And you don't always have, a very strong executive sponsor behind you. You don't necessarily have a very clear objective from your sponsors. And so as a PM, it's very important that you set those expectations and you help your team drive through to those goals from the very beginning.
I think I want to step back a little bit, and with us, we've been focusing a lot on the initiation of this onboarding process of projects. We sort of had projects just coming and going, and we really had to create the structure around having a cycle. And I think that for us, this initiation really focused on communication with the sponsors and being assertive in knowing that we have this process now that we've developed and that we are working with the executive management and leadership in this new process. So we had to be a little bit assertive and have the confidence that this is going to help them and be able to communicate that with them. There's been, to be thorough in our communication and in the process that we've developed in onboarding these projects has really been valuable to the vice presidents that we communicate with, in having this consistency that they know about the cycles, they understand it, they can communicate and help communicate out to their teams about how our initiation process works with even, before we start the project of, what projects are we going to do, what is a project. That's been very important for us at LMU.
Yeah, my main focus within the PMO is on internal IT projects. And the first one that landed in my lap was the migration from Google to Office 365. And that one, there was a lot of, you kind of had to be an advocate for the project itself. A lot of folks within IT didn't think that was a really great idea, probably me included. But it turned that in order to motivate people to move on, to get the idea to move into something that they didn't really feel like doing, you had to advocate for what it was that we were doing for the university as a whole. And also, I put up the negotiation, I think Beth did as well. There's a lot of negotiation involved, and of course I was one of the people I work with now are my peers. And now I'm trying to tell them what to do with zero authority, and it's a very interesting thing. I have to negotiate with them in a weird sense, at least from the starting point. But being an advocate is probably a lot of that, at least from my experience.
Anything from you folks?
I have a question about the charter. Now, PMI has this laughable notion that the sponsor will provide the charter in the initiation phase, and I'm interested in whether or not you guys have experienced the sponsor creating the charter, or whether you create the charter, whether it really happens in initiation, or whether that's part of planning.
We build the charter.
Yes.
We build the charter. We meet with the business owners and the different team members. We get as much information as we can at the beginning. We meet with our executive sponsors to find out what their ultimate goal is and perhaps what their budget concerns are, that sort of thing. Then we write up the charter, we send it out to the executive sponsor who signs it.
And they sign it?
Yes.
Do you do that in initiation or?
We do that before initiation. No, we do it right at initiation. It's the first thing we do. And we're leaning towards now shifting to using the charter as an initial foundation and then building in business process into that life cycle, so that the business process gives you a chance to better define scope and requirements, because your charter, if you're building that at the very beginning, you have very broad outlines of what you need to achieve. And so we're hoping through PMO taking more leadership in the actual process and design piece, that the charter will become a more dynamic living document instead of something we build in the beginning that nobody looks at until there's a question of scope.
For LMU, the charter was, or at least for me, it was a sticky note on my desk for the last probably 9 months. And just about 2 months ago, finally having some time, developing a template, and we look at it as part of the planning. So we have the business case, which we've just now pushed out to the requesters and sponsors, that they really own that to justify why we should do this project. We were authoring that business case. We've pushed that out to them, so that's what the business case is. Once the project is onboarded, we now have this charter as really the planning phase is now going deep into we want to do this. It's what are really the objectives, what is the resources, both time and money, that it's really going to take now. We estimated it before, now it's 6 months, a year later. So what is it really going to take now to get this going? How are we going to communicate? So the charter for us is really that planning stage, and literally it's in pilot right now with a couple projects that my PMs are running, and they're starting to love it, which is great because they already see how it's going to be valuable in the execution, monitoring, and controlling, and closing of having that sort of document. So our plan is to get the sponsors to sign off and say, "Are you sure this is what you want to do?" And if it's not, then we need to talk about going a different direction.
Unsurprisingly, you and I do that. Though your approach is closer to the PMI approach.
Right.
Yeah.
Roger, you want to?
We don't actually, well, we're starting to talk about doing a charter, but the first thing we do is we get a project request filled out. We have a basic form. It's not a holistic charter. It's getting a description, justification, kind of high-level resource and budget review. And what we do is we work with whomever we need to work with to fill that out correctly, and then we move it on to the next step. And what we do is we get approval to move into planning, and once we get into planning, then we build an actual holistic charter that includes communication plan, procurement plan, that kind of thing. But then the next step after that is we need to get approval for execution. One of the things that we've found is that we have a lot of projects coming in that require a lot of work and limited resources to do so. So we don't want to just jump into execution. We want a sense of governance. We need somebody else to say, go ahead and move in. So the charter's kind of that step right before execution.
So do you do stage gate monitoring and auditing before you move between phases?
Yes, we do.
It's very good. It's very advanced.
Yes. How do you guys prioritize your portfolio?
First in, first out for Gonzaga.
We actually have a priority matrix kind of thing. So when the project is actually initiated, we do something similar to what Gonzaga does. We have a form in our ticketing system that people fill out, and they answer a series of questions. And that question then gives a rating. It looks at risk, it looks at opportunity, it looks at viability, those sorts of things. And then our directors meet fairly regularly. I think they're doing it now. They might once a month, but they have a fairly substantial PPM meeting. And at that point, they look at those projects and determine the priority and who's going to be assigned to them.
We just at LMU took that control out of the ITS management and moved it to a governance structure. So we have 3 cycles that now is going to a university technology committee. They look at a risk and benefit to the university matrix that we fill out with the users, and they're the ones that prioritize. And then that priority goes to the ITS management to then look at the scheduling opportunities of what's possible with the resources. So that's sort of
That's nice.
Yes, very nice.
the process of prioritization.
Roger?
Yes.
So the move to the mail system is kind of pretty well defined, and obviously you know what you're doing as opposed to a project where somebody's requesting, from scratch for you to do something. But in my experience, and I don't know, did you stay in the phases, like really, or try to? Because when we met, he said, we're planning on doing this, and people started asking when. And we're only planning right now. But, then it was like, you come back when you have more information or something. So how did you, can you stay, or do you really start planning ahead when things are pretty clear like that?
Well, with that project in particular, we actually had 2 projects. The first one, being that it was so big, our stakeholder base is just huge. The first project was to plan. And it was to figure out who we're going to communicate with, how we're going to communicate with them. Pretty much like you said, everything's kind of set in stone, and we're working with the vendor, a third party, to come in and do the migration for us. So yeah, that was a two-project piece. That's how we did that
Planning
one.
the project as a project.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Executing the project as a project.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And it worked really well, I have to say.
Yeah.
You know, we kind of went around and around on really what to do with that, but lo and behold, it did work.
Yeah, our saving grace was the communication plan.
Yes,
that
it was.
really saved us, and you guys saw it up in where Cassandra showed part of it.
Yeah, that's
that
neat.
was.
Tim?
Something just to put a governance model in place as well, and we use a system called Team Dynamics. I'm sure you guys are familiar with it, but our entire business case is built within that. So I started to see my team spending way too much in the planning on the front end, and these projects were either the wrong idea, a bad idea, no budget. So we spent way too much time on this. We got to eliminate this. So what we do is I assign a PMO liaison during the business case. So people don't know what business cases go like that, or at least good ones, I should say. So what we do is we kind of insert ourselves to walk them through that process. So we know just enough on that front end until it gets to the governance kind of lesson. And then, if everything's approved and whatnot, then we'll go to that full plan. So we're kind of involved in the business case, which is had some success.
Sure. The other thing we are doing too here at Gonzaga is we've moved to Project Online. And we're building in that workflow for that gated approach that we talked about. So we will have our authorization fully embedded in Project Online, both from the stages of initiation to planning and planning into execution. So, pretty fortunate. Anything else on initiation? If
No, I
not,
just have a question.
Oh, sure.
How do you, if you are in the initiation phase and you have folks who are not on board with what you want to do within the IT team, because they're your resources, how do you approach them? How do you get them to shift? In the previous session, I think it was Kathy that said, the whole thing, or no, it was Paige, you got to talk IT, you got to bring home. How do you discover that, and then how do you address it? Because your team member, you don't want to be disgruntled from the start.
I've been lucky enough to be in IT for a long enough time and in different roles to have established really substantial relationships with a lot of people in IT. So I hear very quickly rumblings, and I go directly to the source.
Yeah.
And talk to them, and I find out what are their concerns, what are their worries. I negotiate with them, that's the best way to describe it. And sometimes I pull the hard line depending on who it is, and I tell them, look, I totally understand where you're coming from, I appreciate your fears and anxieties here. I go, but we've got to move forward on this, and I need you to be on board, and I need you to help me get through these things that you really see as a problem. So I want to know exactly what they are, and I want to touch base with you periodically through the project, whether it's an agile approach or a more waterfall approach, and find out how we're doing, are we addressing those concerns, and also planning out some contingency with that person. And that, I found that really helps them feel like they're part of the process, and even if they still have anxieties and concerns about it, they're more willing to move forward than to fight against the flow.
And if that doesn't work, I've gone to managers and directors that they report to.
Yeah.
So I think that's the unique thing about project management, is that many of these people don't report to us. So in the relationships, we have a very strong management team that, very open communication to be able to talk about the, trouble people of the project, and to just have them sit down and ask the questions sometimes works better when it's coming from that person they may trust and know a little bit better.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, like I said, I'm working with peers. Or previous peers. I walked into the room, I think last week, and they said, "Oh, he's in management now, don't you?" Ooh. So, but I do know that I have a level of trust. That my previous performance, anytime somebody asked something of me, I was always able to give it to them, and we built a trust relationship there over time. But having that trust, I already know, allows me to work with some people that probably wouldn't speak openly for someone in my position, but I've had enough time to build that trust and that relationship that they are willing to speak openly, and even if they have issues, they'll tell me what the issues are, even if they don't like the idea of bureaucracy and process and why can't I just get my job done, you know, that helps.
On another side, it sounds like you're asking also about, you know, if they're not on board with the project as well. And I think that we have a weekly project status meeting where I read through every single status that each project manager has provided. So we have all managers and directors and the CIO in the room talking about where things are at every week. And that really just opens the communication lines that when we onboard new projects each term, we start to go through and say, okay, here's what the project's about, and just give a little bit of an overview so that at least, you know, the managers and directors are going to their staff saying, hey, I just found out we're doing this, because that may be the first time that they hear about the project. And I think that just helps on the buy-in from them to understand from their direct supervisor who they have that community or that trust with, of knowing, oh, hey, we're finding out about this a little bit earlier than scheduling the meeting, and why am I going to this meeting?
Yeah, I actually set that up with every group if I have a project with them or not, but it's an individual thing. I like actually doing it all at once, because that not only helps me communicate the projects I'm working with them on, but everybody's projects as a whole.
I know we're only on the first phase. Last quick question. Do you guys do portfolio formation at set times during the year, so you actually have, we are now forming the portfolio of projects for X period of time, or do you accept projects just on a continuing basis throughout the
Ours
year?
is,
FIFO.
again, first in, first out throughout the year.
Okay.
We do not operate from any kind of capital budget system at all.
Okay.
We take projects in at any
It
time.
is.
We take them in at any time, but it does they do have a monthly PPM meeting where they evaluate what projects are going to be initiated in what period.
Okay.
We accept them anytime, but have 3 cycles, and we're very clear, you just missed the cycle, and we won't be looking at this until August. So right now, we will accept it, we'll talk about it, but we say, this is not going to governance until August, and with an earlier start in September, so very clear expectations of where they're at. And if they need it now, then they need a senior vice president override to be able to then slip it in off cycle. You know, there are exceptions. So if the senior vice president says this has to go in the summer, we missed it, but it has to go, then we do have that override capability.
That's your cycle, spring, fall, summer?
Yeah, right now we have spring, fall, summer. We're looking and evaluating of maybe only having a 2 time. So we actually opened our capital budget to allow for capital money to be distributed at all 3 cycles as well.
Wow.
So that was a new change that just happened where the CIO left some money left over so that for this upcoming fall evaluation, there will be capital money that is newly distributed that can start right away.
Very good.
One last question around initiation, and do you guys publish what is a project? What is I know yesterday, Matt, we were talking about that like system maintenance, routine maintenance or whatever, versus what is break fix, because, I mean, we have an issue with.
Yeah, we have it defined on our website, what it
Okay.
is. And we also internally distinguish between projects that are managed by the PMO versus projects that are managed by other IT staff.
Okay.
And we
you're
manage
right.
those differently. So a lot of the projects that are managed by the PMO tend to be more waterfall because they're bigger, longer-term projects, where the smaller projects that I'm managing or my colleagues in different parts are managing tend to be more of an agile, organic approach.
Our process is fairly new in getting it finally settled, so we have not have it on the website yet. So it's not yet communicated out, but it will be soon, hopefully.
Ours is actually on our website too. We have set criteria, cost, time, complexity, those sorts of things. So the criteria is posted. And then we distinguish between major and non-major projects, and there's a set of, rules, procedures around each of those as
There
well.
obviously are things that you don't follow the methodology for, like they're small. and-
Yes, all the time. Yeah, especially if they're small and it's only one department that you're working with. But anytime the project starts to creep into multiple university departments using multiple resources, then we start to really look and see if we need to have a more sophisticated approach to the project.
That's us too.
We don't want to burden the accomplishment of the goal with too much project management if it's not necessary. So we really think about those things critically.
The thing that we struggle with, and I'm curious to hear what others struggle with because of all those little ones that come through, that's resources, that's work.
We track them.
It's that operational versus,
Yeah, we track them. Yeah.
That's always.
Yep. And we are moving, our PMO director, David Crimsey, is really trying to move us more towards a resource model, but as I'm sure all of you know, it's very difficult to move into that sphere of tracking because it takes a lot of time just to track resources. But we do, because all of us, if we're doing a project, we have to put it into our ticketing system, whether it's a PMO project or an internal project. That includes us identifying the resources that are on that project, even if we're not clearly stating how long that person's working on it. So if you were to look at any of my projects, you'd see all the different resources I've identified, and the directors all have insight to that, and the CIO has insight to that, and the directors use that to say, look, Michael Fraley, our programming manager, he's on 20 different projects. That's not realistic. We have to think about timing on these things, prioritize things appropriately.
Okay, let's move on to planning. You know, it's that next step in everything that I talk to the PMs about at Gonzaga here it is all about the planning. We try to plan, really front end load. And I know somebody said that takes a while to do that, or it sucks up a lot of time and resources, but what we are finding is it's paying off. We're going into these projects, getting into execution, and we're not finding questions and concerns and issues and risks because we've identified it all. We've turned over everything we can to find out more about the project and planning. So I think one of the biggest things for me in planning is just kind of being able to look at the project in its entirety, again, through what it's going to take for resources, what is it going to take for funding, what are the issues, the risk. I mean, really try to look at every angle of the project possible. So it takes a lot of time and effort, I know, but it is that point in time where you are beginning to live, breathe, eat the project. So.
I'm going to say exactly what she said, and I can't even stress it enough. Every project that we struggled with has been a project where we didn't do appropriate planning on the front end. And I think this is one of these areas where the PMO and the project managers can really be leaders in making sure that's being done, because you're going to have your programmers who want to just start building it. You're going to have their business users who want to be using it and they don't care how you build it, they just want it built. And so the PM, the project manager, really has to go in there and force that issue from the people that are saying, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough resources, we can't spend 3 months planning this project out. Well, if you don't spend 3 months planning the project out, it's going to take us 18 months or 24 months to finish this project. You take 3 months, we're going to be able to build it in 1 month, and it's going to be less than 6 months for it to be deployed. So you really, as project managers, it's really critical that at that stage, you're really pulling out any sort of leadership technique that you've got, whether it's negotiation, whether it's, manipulation, however you want to phrase it. You start bringing in the candy, the donuts, whatever it takes. That's the stage where it really should not ever be optional, and only the project manager can be the one that says we're not moving on this project unless it's really.
Obviously, this is for us, it's the first time that we have the project team together. So having that honesty about, here's our business case and here's what was said a year ago. Let's be honest in what it really looks like right now. So, the question of what's in scope and that negotiating comes a lot. I think also the leadership quality that's really needed is the organization at this point. This is, where the staff is going to see and read how you're going to lead them throughout the rest of the project, and having that organization with, the schedule, with painting the picture about what it is for them and setting that expectations, I think is really important at this point, because this is where they're either going to be right on board or we're going to lose them, and you're going to have to rebuild that trust and that honesty throughout the rest of the project.
Yeah. I don't have much to add to that. That's in my case, it's in a lot of ways just trying to be an advocate for the process of building these planning documents. The communication plan, the Office 365 project. We actually had a delay, and we didn't have that identified as a risk, and that was a huge, painful spot in that project. The delay was we were supposed to go live, I think, January 7th while the kids were gone, or January 10th or something, and the migration wasn't going quick enough. and we weren't able to make that date. We had to push it off to January 31st or something like that, and that hurt. That was very, very painful. We hit right in the middle of a semester, and it stunk, and we didn't have a plan for it. So if we, in retrospect, we said, what would we plan for? Well, now that question goes in every single one of our communication and risk identification. What happens if there is a delay here? What if we can't hit the delivery date? But the importance of it, the importance of this step is just enormous. It's
Can't
huge.
step over it.
No, you cannot. You can't skip past it, and you have to get everything squared away. Procurement plan and everything.
One of the things, leadership, there's a lot of delegation in leadership, and I think that was something that took a while for me to learn, is that I came in wanting to start this PMO. I had this great plan of a year and going through each of the different stages and looking at templates and process, and it's been 2 years and I'm still in initiation. But what I've learned is that for our planning, we had a little bit of a restructure where we got business analysts for the first time, and it was really about empowering the folks that are doing the planning to come up with those templates and those documentation. And I don't look at it that I as a PMO own planning. I look at it that it's all my peers areas that own the planning, and looking at design and what does a design document look like and what kind of design documents do we need for certain projects. They're handling all that right now. We have a solution architect who's working with business analysts and is really facilitating that whole process of the planning, documentation, and templates that are needed. And I look at my role as really, then as a PM, is implementing this process of theirs. So that was sort of a little letting go in that, I don't own all of these pieces of the project lifecycle. And so that was a little bit of a humbling experience to delegate that out.
I have a question. You mentioned the design piece, and we've been kind of working a little bit on how much happens in that design. We're looking at ITSM model where, if you're familiar with ITIL at all, there's the actual design phase, where there's a major document, the design package that gets built, that talks about the SLAs, that talks about everything. How do you have any of that in your process for planning for, or is it an execution in building that document, or do you even have that portion? I mean,
and our documents are currently being developed, so we don't have it right now, but
Okay.
we're really focusing on design as a major part of the planning. That design is in the planning for us, and so right now they're writing out what is going to go in those design docs. So I haven't even seen them yet, so they're still being developed, but it's going to be a big emphasis, and we've instituted a design review board that has different resources from all different areas for customization, integrations, to look at, to have a little bit of a wider view of how we're designing these systems.
Anything else on planning? Jill?
I would just
She
say.
beat you.
She did. She's very sharp.
With the setting of the clear goals, I think that is so essential. And I think the other piece that is really essential is documenting and writing the roles for each team member. I know for us that the projects that I have either supported or managed, where that's clearly defined the role of a steering body, what the role of the project sponsor is, and where the authority lies, and all of that has been much better when it's clearly documented, and people, it's almost like comforting. I've almost seen people relax a little bit, like, oh, okay, this is what you expect of me. We're just in a culture where it's just a lot of projects are planned very nebulously. I don't even know if that's a word, but and it's like, yeah, we'll do this, and it's like, no, who's doing that? So,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's been a big thing for us.
Rich?
So my question, I know it's a very difficult one, is in terms of resource allocation and capacity planning across the whole portfolio, so that resources are not oversubscribed across 15 different projects and completely stressed out. So.
That's in our 3-hour presentation. Next year, I think. Next year.
The one on the wheel.
I don't know. I don't even want to go there.
I don't think.
It's a tough.
Yeah.
It's a tough thing to look at, right? I mean, we are also strapped with the number of resources that we have available to us, and it is a juggling game, right? But I think the best thing is communication, and it's talking to whomever they are supervised or managed, and trying to make holding those weekly meetings or whatever, just making sure everybody's on board with what the urgencies are.
I don't know if any of you are familiar with the project management maturity model.
Partners.
Yeah, and I think the last one is where the PMO gets dedicated resources during time. So you have a project, and I get Jill for 20 hours a week for this project, and she's mine for 20 hours. And I get my programmer for 30 hours for this project, and he's mine for 30 hours. And, I think that that's a very mature model, and I would love to get to that point where I'm not getting these emails from Michael that says, oh, well, I can't work on that this week because I've got this other critical project that is going live in 2 weeks, and I've been told I have to focus on this. So now my project is starting to slip because of that. So I would love for us to get to that point of a maturity level, but we haven't even gotten to that point where we're tracking hours. I need to know what hours we're spending on stuff, and that's a real struggle to get there.
That is so difficult. I almost wonder if, and we were talking about this over lunch, I almost wonder if it's a fallacy that is required before you can do capacity.
I don't know, is it?
Because it is so difficult to
a good point.
get to capture those hours.
I say we skip that whole stage and go immediately to me just getting my resources.
I like the way you think.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, like, what percentage of the time is project planning versus actual writing the code or designing? I guess that's the design phase, because there's the work and then there's the planning. And what is your sense of how much is dedicated to that part of it? I see that as what comes eventually into the WBS, like that's the work that's going to get done.
Yeah.
How much time is, because we don't allocate a lot of time to that. And
I would say 60 to 75% of the time should be planning, and 25 should be building the solution. That's how I'd see it. I haven't been on any project where it took longer to build than it took to design it.
Right.
doesn't that really, doesn't that increase your, or decrease your productivity by 2/3 or whatever?
No, because if we don't design it properly, then I'm going to be spending a lot more money on my programming resources or on my consultant resources to build it and I'm going to go through a lot more QA cycles, and I'm going to have a lot more change management issues because we didn't clearly plan it out in the beginning.
I agree. Okay, I'm going to try to keep us moving ahead here. Execution, influencer. I like this next one too, and I think this is yours, Beth. The role playing and the good cop, bad cop. You want to elaborate on that for us?
Oh yeah. Let me talk about that. So when we implemented Banner, we had encountered a real significant issue with human resources and them going live with their module. And it really needed to go live in January because that's the start of the tax year, and benefits and everything else is calculated that way. And for whatever reason, they had a lot of anxiety and fear, even though all of our testing was going really well. Steve Gallagher, who's going to be presenting tomorrow, who's CIO of Harvard Business School now, he was my director at that time. He and I would stay up till midnight, 1 in the morning, working with HR testing, and we couldn't see where their fear was coming from. And they kept pushing back, no, we can't go live in January, we can't go live, we can't go live. And I kept being the good cop, the good cop, the good cop, and always trying to persuade them. And finally got to the point where I started becoming the bad cop, and Steve was the good cop. So I started saying, we're going live. And then finally we switched again, and we went to Tracy, who's also presenting tomorrow, who was the CIO at the time. And Steve was trying to advocate for HR, here's the good reasons for going live, and I basically said, no, I'm putting my reputation on the line. We are going to go live in January. We're going to be successful when we go live. Any hiccup that we encounter is going to happen. And I'm saying that we have to go live, because if we don't go live, it's going to be much more painful for us, much more difficult for HR, and it's going to look really badly for us. And I was quite aggressive in that, and I think I might have threatened to quit if we didn't go live. Really, it was like that. But I really had to take on that bad cop stance because I felt it was necessary. They would have waited 3 months, and then they would have said we have to wait till May. You know, that's where they were. And but when you do something like that, when you take that bad cop role, you have to live with whatever you're pushing for. You have to be prepared. If they had not been able to pay people on January 15th, I probably would have lost my job because I was really putting things on the line. So you have to be really confident and really prepared to take on that bad cop role.
Did you have like your technical team back you up?
Yeah, even our consultant from SunGuard was like not able to articulate what HR's anxieties were because all of our payroll testing cycles were going well. And when we went live, everything went fine. This is going to make you all laugh because it's inevitable. The one person that we had a problem paying was our auditor for tax and compliance.
Wow.
Former tax attorney. This is not someone that you want to upset, and that was a big deal, but Steve had a very good relationship with Dom, and he was able to smooth the waters, but overall, it went fine. So that's where when you're involved in the project and you're literally married to it and you're that advocate where you've been living that project, and especially with a banner implementation, you've been living it with it for several years, you know and you have that sense of completeness as a project manager where you can put yourself on the line like that and stand up for the project because you know that it's going to be okay.
Talking about auditors, do you guys have an auditor to audit this process, the entire? No,
We don't.
Do you mean to audit the project
Yeah.
methodology?
Yeah, like that.
That's our bad cop.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
we
So
don't.
Roger, anything to add? Matt, anything to add?
For me, I see that this, going into execution, it's that trust. I, the PM, have to trust that we've gone through the proper planning. I'm trusting those that are doing the work to do their work, and sometimes you have to sort of sit back and hope that, they're doing what they need to do. But with that, you always have to have your feelers out. So there's awareness that you have to have that's really getting the pulse of how things are really going, and that takes. That's a difficult skill, I think, to really, to teach someone of that. You really have to listen, hear, smell everything that's going on.
Yeah, I would agree. Listening.
Listening.
Yeah.
When there is a change in time, scope, cost, do you guys have a change management process or?
We do.
So do we.
Yeah.
Yeah, another post-it from the last 9 months, and it just got started about a month ago.
Yeah. We go to the sponsors.
It's all these post-it notes. It's on the same
Ours
post-it
actually
note.
routes back to the sponsor for sign-off.
Ours too.
Good.
Yeah.
So let's move into monitoring and controlling because it does go hand in hand with execution. Matt, you kind of touched on it there that, it takes a real sense to get those feelers out there to really find out how well your project is going. So it's kind of making yourself present in a lot of places, especially if it is a large project and has many, resources that are working on it. So, Roger, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think that's kind of where a lot of the trust comes in. If there is an issue, then I can trust that they're going to actually tell me that there is an issue rather than trying to hide it and fix it on their own, and next thing you know, we're 3 days late. But building that trust and being able to listen and hear what everybody, what the problem might be or where they're at.
Yeah. Good. Matt?
I'm reading a book on persuasion right now, and was just reading about concession and how, if a developer's doing something and we have a deadline, I can't make it. I think, what I really see is looking at, I'll give you that extra week, but this is what I need to return, and let's work together. And so it's really, in that monitoring and controlling, it's looking at how are we persuading them to continue on and do their job and do it right. And there is sometimes this respectfulness and being reasonable about the external factors that are affecting what's going on. I think that being fair and really representing both sides, I think that's a tough place of a PM, especially when you're housed in IT. You maybe have a little bit more of affinity towards the ITS and your resources, but you're really representing this business office as well if you're on a university project. So I think gaining that trust and being fair and going to leadership when those decisions, I just came off of a Blackboard Transact upgrade of our one card system, and there were many executive meetings with Patrick as the CIO and the vice president from the business office and me representing IT and the business manager going in with different opinions of how we should do things. And as I tried my best to be fair in representing, here are the facts, here's what it looks like, and I think that really helped bring those difficult decisions and try to have that resolution happen to keep the projects going on, because some of those difficult moments could really stall a project.
I'll bring back the good cop, bad cop thing, because that's just as important in monitoring and controlling as in execution. And I've developed a good relationship with the project, another HR project I'm involved in that has been slipping because of not so great planning in the beginning. And when they pulled me on board and I started seeing why they were having issues executing, it was because of the planning, and I pulled them kind of back from a system analyst position. But ever since then, the PM and I have developed this really good cop, bad cop kind of routine. And she is trying to maintain the scope and the timeline, and I'm being the pushback every time HR comes forward and they want to add something to the scope or they want to enhance it. Oh, we didn't think about this. Oh, we didn't think about that. I'll be sitting there and I'll be saying literally, are you sure you need this? Is this going to stop us from going live? And I'll be that one that's kind of pushing, because I want Diana to maintain the trust of the team, because it's kind of a delicate team and there's a lot of anxiety because there hasn't been a very good planning. Back to the importance of planning, right? And so I want her to maintain that trust, because she's got to keep those relationships going forward. And so I've been the one that's been really pushing back aggressively on any kind of effort to try to change something. And then you get that feeling that Matt was talking about as you're working with people on how far you can push and when you have to concede. And that's the only way you get there is by working with those people, knowing who they are, and having a really good understanding of what the end result really needs to look like.
Great. And closing. Kind of that wrap up to the project. So important, of course. But for whatever reason, sometimes in my observation, we tend to skip closing. We're ready to move on to that next project, right? And we tend to fall back on some of the things that are really most important to tie up. But anything else?
So for closing, this is the one gate that we have sort of established as having necessary procedures. The biggest one being an operational support document. One that I felt was really in operations hands, but because it wasn't moving, I took that on and said, we have to do this, and we have to have this transition from project to support. And so I created this whole matrix that is now mandatory. If you don't give me this matrix to then hand off to our client services, I'm not closing the project, and you're gonna have to talk about it every week. And it's in that meeting with the CIO saying, why isn't this happening? And so it's, really going through, it's basically for the help desk that if somebody calls and says, I need help with this, the matrix should be saying, should you be going to the vendor first? Should you be going to IT first? And it outlines on server support, customizations, everything. And so that's really been in part of the closing of what's been great. As far as reassuring the users, right now with this Transact migration, there's about 60 items in our issues list, and I'm ready to close in about 2 weeks. And it's really talking about reassuring in this transition that, there's not, for this specific instance, we've been live since March and still working on issues. So it's reassuring that the issues aren't going to go away, it's just going to be managed by somebody else. That, my contribution as the project manager is not any different than the director of enterprise systems that can manage these issues with the system. And so it's really that reassurance to the stakeholders that they're not going to go away, they're just going to be sort of transferred, because I do need to move on to other projects. So I can't quite tell you if that's going to be successful, because that's going to happen in about a month, but I think that that's really the key that I think is important in leading this to the end.
Roger.
Wow. Our closing phase is a little bit lighter weight. I think it's interesting, some of the transition stuff. We've talked about doing some of this transition, the transition into production in an execution phase, never considered in a closing phase, and I think it's a really smart idea. Mainly what our closing phase is basically a listening session. Find out what went right, what went wrong, and having that conversation with all the stakeholders as well, all the technical folk. What you do with that data, that's still yet to be determined, but hopefully we learn something from it.
Very good. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yes.
Sorry.
There's a couple of hands.
Oh.
Who was first? You're Okay.
No, I insist. No, thanks, man. All right, I have a quick question. Yes.
We'll try to be quick. PM offices don't spring fully formed from Zeus's head. How exactly did you bring these up in your organizations? Was it I'm guessing a different story for everybody, but did the PMO already exist and you just stepped into it? Or did you really carry the banner of, you know, guys, I've been doing this for a while, there's a right way to do it. We have to take these slow but important building processes to make this happen.
I came from Zeus.
Almost 4 years ago today, I walked in the doors and my mission was to create a PMO. So that was Chris Gill's vision. That's what he wanted.
So it only took 4 years and you're all done now.
Right. There's a long way to go.
And at USF, it was similar. Well, I managed the project, the banner project, but we didn't have a PMO at that time. And I was promoted into Director of Project Management specifically to build out the PMO. And I did that for a year and then stepped down, and now David Crimsey is doing a great job. But it was very organic, and organic in the sense of how we built it out, but it really was driven by our CIO, who knew that it was a necessary, critical operational need for us. And it was through her efforts and then through Steve's efforts to keep pushing that forward, and now through Opender, who clearly appreciates and values the PMO significantly. And I think that's the only way it can work, is by executive leadership. You can do it organically, but if you don't have that CIO who's saying this is necessary, I'm going to get you the resources, we're going to figure it out, it's never going to move forward.
And that has helped us to have the CIO totally backing it and supporting it in all ways, shapes, and forms. I mean, we're a group of 3 now.
I think Patrick was having some drinks with Chris about 4 years ago, because that's when LMU's directive came to say we wanted a PMO. So I was promoted from managing our application developers to a senior project manager with the hope to start the PMO. And it literally was around the same time.
I think it's the same time
Yeah.
for us too. It was, you know, I think they all got together over drinks and decided they needed to do that.
Lollipop's a good time, Ed.
All right, did everybody's name get put into the little box here?
Yes.
Great.
I don't know why I say yes, I don't really know.
Okay.
Your name's there, so everybody needs it.
As a matter of fact, I've been taking everybody else's name out.
This was a great session. I hope you found some little nugget to take away today. So, what a great group of people and all their insights. Things for you, and then it's lunchtime, and you do need to walk back to Cataldo for that. But Matt, why don't you key us up on the book?
So this is a book we were looking and thought, what could we give to the session? So this is a book called Heroic Leadership by Chris Loney, who is an ex-Jesuit, and it was a book that we were given to read as part of a management retreat, and it just really goes through, I thought, you know, sometimes stating the obvious of what we may know, but it was in a creative way of basically telling the story of the Jesuits and how can this 450-year-old company last throughout, you know, time. If we look at big companies, they fail a lot of times. So how's the Jesuits lasted? And it goes through just their story, and it brings in little pieces of leadership that they thought is key of why it's lasted. So we are raffling this off to a lucky winner. And if you've read it and want to pass it on,
Betsy.
Betsy.
Way to go, Betsy.
There you go, Betsy.
And just to add to the theme today, leadership is bigger than just being who we are, and remember those lollipop moments. So don't spoil your lunch.
I think that's a great tie-in, because as you guys were speaking, I just felt that you all really articulated well that there was an Ignatian backdrop to the whole session. I thought, from talking about Matt, I think at one point when you were talking about the functional manager and the CIO and trying to be, like, you didn't say the words indifferent, but the indifference and, you know, how the Jesuits kind of, you know, teach that. I thought it was great, and it's an awesome tie-in. You guys did a nice job.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy lunch.
Matt.